Today we're going to talk about coordinate grids. What you see here on the board is a coordinate grid. It's composed of a horizontal line, which we call the x-axis, and a vertical line, which we call the y-axis. When you're taking notes on this, please do so on graph paper. So we have our x-axis and our y-axis. And what the coordinate grid allows us to do is identify any point that lines in this area. Now, the arrows at the end of the axis mean that they go on forever. So that means that even though I'm going to put some values for numbers on the x-axis, the numbers actually go on forever. And even though I'm going to put some numbers for my y-axis, they go on forever. So the x-axis is the axis where we put our independent variable in science. And the y-axis is where the dependent variable goes. And if you haven't learned about these yet, you will soon. Okay? So independent variable goes on the x-axis, the dependent variable goes on the y-axis. And when we talk about the coordinate grid, we have 4 different quadrants. We have this first quadrant, which is called Quadrant 1. Going counterclockwise, the next quadrant is called Quadrant 2. Below that is Quadrant 3. And next to that is Quadrant 4. So again, these quadrants start with the area on the upper right-hand side of the graph and move counterclockwise around the graph. So they move in this sort of direction. Okay, so now that we have our quadrants, we're going to put some numbers on here. And the numbers that we use are going to start at the number 0. So this point where the numbers start at here is called the origin. And the origin of the graph always starts at 0. Okay? It means that it's 0x and 0y. What we do from that point is we decide what values we're going to put on here. Oftentimes, you see it increase by values of 1. But you could also do values of 2, values of 5, values of 10. It will just really depend. So be aware that as long as it increases at a common interval, that it will work. So today, for the sake of ease, we're going to just use the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? So this is our positive area going from the origin to the right, and it's the numbers 1 through 10. Now, if we go the opposite direction, so still along the x-axis but going to the left, we would have the negative numbers. So we would have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7, -8, -9, and -10. Something to pay attention to here is that I'm labeling the lines, not the spaces. So that's a common thing that a lot of beginners do, is they try to label the spaces rather than the lines. Okay. Now going up and down, if you think of a thermometer, right, above 0 is positive. So just like that, above 0 is going to be positive here. So as I name my places, the origin is 0, then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. Going down, just like a thermometer, below 0 would be a -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, etc. Now the reason using graph paper helps is it makes sure that each of the lines is equally spaced. Now, my next step here is going to be to plot some points and identify where I'm plotting my points. So to do this, we use something called an ordered pair. So let me explain what an ordered pair is over here for you. So an ordered pair is sometimes called a coordinate pair as well, but it's a parentheses, and then within the parentheses, we give an x value and a y value. The x value refers to the placement along the x-axis. The y value refers to the placement along the y-axis. We always plot x before y. X is always the first value. So sometimes you may have something such as 2, 3 given as an ordered pair. The 2 then says that the x value is 2 and the y value is 3. So you'd start at the origin and you'd go over 2. That's my x value. Then the 3 tells me from this point I go up 3. And I can put a dot there. So that gives me a point on this coordinate grid. Now we can also have points that are negative, positive, etc. So let's try another one. Let's try -5, 1. So -5 is going to be on my x-axis. So I go to -5 on my x-axis, and then I go up 1. So -5 and up 1 would be that point, this ordered pair. So there are some trends that happen on our coordinate grids. And if we look at quadrant 1, you'll notice that my x and my y values here are both positive. So whatever area in quadrant 1 I'm going to plot in, they're going to be positive. Okay? So my x value is positive, and my y value is also positive. In quadrant 2, if I look at my x value is negative, and my y value is positive. You'll notice with ordered pairs, I'm always separating the two numbers with a comma. When you're working on WAMAP or on tests, quizzes, assignments, we always want our ordered pair with parentheses, our two numbers separated by a comma. Let's look at quadrant 3. So quadrant 3, my x values are going to be negative, and my y values are also going to be negative. And my quadrant 4, my x values, can you guess? Yes, they're going to be positive, and my y values are going to be negative. So just by seeing an ordered pair, you can get an idea of where on the graph it's going to lay. Now, on here, I wrote my quadrants with normal numbers. Normally, we indicate quadrants with Roman numerals, but since I haven't taught Roman numerals, I just want you to start getting the feel that this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. A teacher in the future might use Roman numerals instead to describe those points. Okay, so we're going to take a minute and we're going to try plotting a few more points and then also trying to figure out where a point lies. So let's try plotting this point. Let's try plotting -5, -3. So again, we're going to start at my x value is -5, go over -5, and then go down -3. So right there is my value, my dot that represents -5, -3. Let's plot one in the quadrant 4. Let's do this one. Let's do 7, -1. Okay. So see if you can do it on your own. We're going to go to 7. And then how many are we going to go down? 1. Yep, right there. and we would put a dot there to represent that point. I'm going to erase the dots that I have drawn. And what we're going to do is we're going to see if we can identify where some points lie and write ordered pairs for them. So I'm going to put a dot right here, put a dot right here, and I'm going to put a dot right here. Now, you can probably see that if we actually had grid paper here, we'd be able to find the location a little easier because there'd be lines to show us where these points are. So to place this point, this one that I put down here, we're going to start with the x value. So how many did I go over to get to that point? I went over 2 that were positive. So I'll put a 2 for my x value of my ordered pair. How many did I go down? I went down 6. So going down means I have a negative. So that point would be 2, negative 6. Let's look over here. So here I have a point that if I go over to the 6, it's straight up, and if I go to 8, it's straight over. So this point I would name with the x value of 6 and the y value of 8. Let's do the same for the last point we have here. If I, that looks like it's over here. So if I go see where it crosses the x and where it crosses the y, these little dots I'm making, we can see that my x value here, x is first, is negative 5, and my y value is also negative 5. It's possible to have a value like negative 5.5 or negative 5 1/3. You can have fractions and decimals as part of your ordered pair, that's fine. Okay, just one more thing about coordinate grids before we end today, and that is that with coordinate grids, sometimes you don't see the entire grid. Sometimes you just see part of it. So it's not unusual for you to just see quadrant 1. So if I erase these, you see how now we just have our first quadrant. So most of the time in this class, you're going to just see quadrant 1 given. We have a few more symbols that sometimes are represented. If we weren't going up by 1s here, so I'll redraw this. Let's say that we weren't going to start at 0 as a value on my x-axis. I was going to start instead at 10 and go to 11 and 12, etc. I could use this squiggle line to indicate that I'm skipping some numbers at the beginning of the graph. You can't use it in the middle so much, but right here at the beginning, if you're skipping a lot of numbers, you can use that squiggle. So we'll practice that in class a little. The other thing that I want to mention while we're here is the term scatter plot. Okay. So we're going to see this term a bit in class. When we're talking about a scatter plot, we're talking about a coordinate grid with many points placed on it. A lot of times when you gather data in science, you want to put your data, graph it on a coordinate grid. And when you graph many points on there, it becomes a scatter plot. Scatter plots don't necessarily make a straight line, but just show where different points lie. And we'll be talking a lot about scatter plots as we go along. Quick thing about scatter plots is we can see different trends with them. So sometimes with the scatter plot, we see that there is a tendency to move in a certain direction. So all these points that I just plotted here, do you see how they're kind of moving from bottom to top? So this is something that we would call a positive correlation. But we can also have a scatter plot with many points that seems to be moving from top to bottom. This one has a negative correlation. Okay. It's also possible to have a scatter plot where the points are everywhere and it doesn't seem to have any trend to it. And this one, we would have no correlation. Okay? Again, you'll see this in class, but I wanted to just talk about it before we get too far into it. Okay, that concludes our video on coordinate grids.